Hello and welcome back to Sam and Ham. This is Ham, and today we're going to be doing a little bit of homebrew review. Today we're looking at another one of my creations. This is an alternate class features list. Something kind of remnant of Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, or probably more similar to the Unearthed Arcana that led to Tasha's. Basically, my goal here was to make some class features for a whole bunch of different classes, with very small changes that can have huge ramifications on how the class plays or flavor-wise. The goal is also to stay to as little homebrew as possible, as goofy as that sounds. Trust me, I know how hard it can be to get your DM to accept homebrew, because then the DM has to read a whole bunch of homebrew, and it's a whole messy thing. So the goal here was as few simple changes as you can possibly do, and with as little, actual homebrew changes as necessary to kind of change the flavor of the class. I think you'll kind of understand as we get into it. One other thing to keep in mind here is you do have to pick any of these at level 1 just to kind of make sure everything stays nice and even. So even though, for example, the Paladin doesn't get any of their spellcasting until level 2, you have to pick all these at level 1 just to make sure there's no cheesing, no shenanigans, nothing going on here. Keep it simple. Pick it at level 1. Replace these features long before you get them. So without further ado, let's dive into this stuff. So our very first one is the Paladin. In this Paladin, you would have an arcane source rather than a divine one like normal. This was actually the start of this project. It's kind of inspired by page 287 in the DMG. It brings up a similar concept of having a Paladin with a different spell list. And so these first couple are going to be pretty simple. They're just different spell lists for the most part, because a pretty easy way to change how the class feels. So for a Paladin with an arcane source of magic, you now use the Sorcerer spell list rather than the Paladin spell list. And when you choose this feature, you choose Ice, Fire, or Lightning, and whenever a class feature or spell that you use would normally deal radiant damage, it does the chosen type of damage instead. So now instead of getting access to all the cool smite spells and the supporty stuff that you normally get, you get access to stuff like Burning Hands, Scorching Ray, Fireball, cool stuff like that. And instead of normally dealing radiant damage, you deal an elemental kind instead. I think this one's pretty well balanced, as elemental damage types are usually worse than radiant, I think pretty much in every regard. And as for spellcasting, the Sorcerer does have a pretty decent spell list, but I'm pretty sure the Paladin one's probably stronger level for level. You're definitely be missing out on a few cool things like Fine Steed, like I said, all the cool smite spells, stuff like that. While this might look like it might tread on the Eldritch Knight a little bit, I think the playstyle is going to be different enough that even if they have similar kind of feels, the mechanics in the playstyle is going to be different enough that I think it's pretty cool. Next up was the Druid. I struggled a little bit with the Druid because I honestly think the absolute best Druid variant that you could come up with was in Tasha's, with the ability to use Wild Shape to summon a familiar. I think that was awesome. I think it's a really good way to not have to worry about Wild Shape and stuff. But we're not talking about that today. We're going to talk about this one. Basically, this one, instead of being a normal druid who is attuned to the normal nature, you're a druid of the Feywild. They have some weird stuff going on in the Feywild, a lot of enchantments and stuff like that. So to represent that, you use the Bard spell list instead of the normal druid one. Honestly, this probably is one of my weaker design choices, I'll be honest, but I think this one's decent enough as it is. Instead of being the druid who is all about casting Entangle or other kind of nature-y spells, you shapeshift into birds and such, and then find somebody while alone and cast Charm Person on them. A lot more enchanting, a lot more good supporty type spells like that. The next up would be the Sylvan Sorcerer. They use the Druid spell list rather than the Sorcerer spell list. I think it's pretty simple, I think it's pretty cool. I think the Druid has a pretty decent spell list that I think could be really cool to do with meta magic. The reason I eventually kind of decided on this is because I was trying to come up with a Druid variant, and was kind of thinking of how to make a druid without wild shape, and I realized that a druid without wild shape is just a caster, like a sorcerer. So I decided, what if you made a sorcerer with the druid spell list? I think it could be pretty decent. Druids have a lot of cool concentration requiring buffs, and I think having that with maybe Twin could be really cool. Maybe quicken a wall of water before you shoot a ray of frost through it, stuff like that. I think it could be a pretty cool kind of build. For the monk, we finally are out of spellcaster range here and are looking at ninja training. Kind of looking at this one because some people really don't like monks in their D&D. You know, they're kind of weird. They've got this Asian theme going on here. So here was a way to kind of change that. So you gain proficiency with light armor, and additionally, any monk ability that says while wearing armor, or while not wearing armor, is changed to while wearing light or no armor. You don't get unarmored defense, and any ability that would normally use wisdom now uses intelligence instead. And you're just supposed to be basically the exact same thing, you just use intelligence and light armor rather than wisdom and no armor. And I think you can kind of tell here, this one is just straight up worse than the normal monk. Wisdom is usually more useful than intelligence, and light armor is generally worse than unarmored defense. So why would any good min-maxing person use this ability? They wouldn't! This is purely for flavor. So for one of the players in one of my games, he detests the idea of walking around with no armor on and just punching trained knights in the face. He thinks that is stupid. He thinks that it ruins his immersion. So I was thinking of him when I made this. Now at least you've got some light armor on, and you try to be a little bit more intelligent with your decision making. Next up is the Warlock of the Studied Pact. This just makes Warlocks intelligence based rather than charisma. Some people would tell you this is how Warlocks should have been from the first place. I'm not one to necessarily agree, but I don't know if I disagree either. Next up is the Brute Rogue. This rogue only gets 3 skills rather than 4, but to make up for that, they get proficiency with medium armor, and they can use sneak attack with weapons that don't have the finesse property. This is supposed to try to be out there to help the strength rogues. And I figured the best thing they could give up to kind of get that extra combat potential would be to give up a little bit of their skill ability. I didn't want to take away expertise or any other class feature. I didn't really want to have to nerf anything in there. But you gotta give up something in order to get those extra proficiencies. And again, I think this could make for a pretty cool darn strength build. I know obviously you can do a strength rogue if you're willing to, strength a rapier, because there's nothing stopping you from using strength with a finesse weapon, but some people just want to sneak attack with a greatsword, man. I'm not one to tell them no. Wizards is, but I'm here to tell wizards no. Alright, now here we get to the couple of weird ones. So we're going to look at the Magically Averse Bard. As some of you who may have played Pathfinder or older editions of D&D might know, bards didn't always used to be full casters. They used to be 3/4 casters, which basically means they got up to 6 levels of spellcasting. We don't quite have that in 5th edition anymore, so people that were that kind of changed. Most of them just didn't get made in 5th edition. But the one who did was Bard, and Bard just got upgraded to a full caster. For those who might miss those old days, I made this. So, this trades in a little bit of spellcasting for some extra combat prowess. So as you can see, they're basically made into half casters. I took the number of spells known and spell slots from the ranger and gave them sneak attack to make up for it. So the sneak attack works just like a rogue, but it increases half as fast. So normally where a rogue would increase, they start at a d6 and they get 2d6 at level 3 and 3d6 at level 5, these guys only increase half the speed of that. Now the spells known here is a little off, you'll notice. A ranger only knows 11 spells at level 20, whereas these guys know 17, and some of you may know that is because of magical secrets. I didn't know what to do with that, I'll be honest. I thought about just cutting the magical secrets in half, because normally you get 2 at level 10, 2 at level 14, and then 2 more at level 18. And I thought about just making it 1 at each of those levels, but I didn't want to cut any more power out of here than I thought I needed to. So where a ranger would normally have 11 spells here, they get 17 because of their magical secrets. But yeah, they ended up also getting 5d6 sneak attack. I don't think it's particularly overpowered. It's just 2d6 extra damage around at level 5. Nah, I don't think that's going to break the game, but it does give you, an option for a less magical bard who's just a little bit better in melee or at a range with a bow, Next up is the Tactician Fighter. This is kind of supposed to be taking the position of the missing warlord. The non-magical support fighter. While obviously you can try to make a decent one with the Battlemaster archetype, I think this is helpful and can be used in addition to that kind of build. For proficiencies, you do not get proficiency with martial weapons. That is a hefty downside. That means no greatswords, no glaives, no barely any reach weapons. I don't even know if there is a simple reach weapon, top of my head. But you still get some decent ones. There's quarterstaffs, you get spears. And honestly, I kind of like the idea of a fighter who might not necessarily use these, the generally superior martial weapons. So really gives you a reason to use more simple weapons, which not a lot of classes have a reason to do. Basically, anybody who wants to use a weapon more than not at all gets proficiencies with non-simple weapons. I thought that was the most fair downside I could give them for the following increases. 1, they get an extra skill proficiency that must come from the list of skills available to fighters level 1. So you get a third skill, it's pretty nice. Your second wind feature, you can heal another creature for the same amount. It can't be an undead or construct, and they have to be within 30 feet of you. So that's, in place of healing yourself, you can heal an ally instead. Lastly, Commander's Attack. When you take the attack action on your turn, you can forego an attack to direct one of your companions to strike. When you do so, choose a friendly creature who can see or hear you. That creature can immediately use its reaction to make one weapon attack. If they do, roll a d4. They gain a bonus to the attack roll equal to the result. The die you roll when using this ability increases to a d6 at level 5, a d8 at 11, and a d10 at level 17. Obviously, this is very similar to Commander Strike from the Battlemaster archetype. But I think Commander Strike is a little, 1, weak. It takes your bonus action. You can only use it a couple of times a day because you only have so many superiority die. And 2, it's not fun for the fighter. Basically, you just say, I don't want to play the game. Hey, Barbarian, you play the game more for me. That is why I introduced this part where they get to roll a die and then your buddy gets that amount of bonus. So even though you're not rolling to hit with your d20, at least you get to roll something. You're rolling the die. You've came to play the game. You're rolling something. Does that potentially make this ability too strong? I don't know, maybe. I don't think so. Just a small bonus to hit. Yes, with bounded accuracy, that is pretty nice. And theoretically getting that bonus unlimited times a day if you really want to could potentially be very strong. Don't get me wrong. But again, you don't get martial weapons, so you're not going to be doing much with your turn. So I think that trying to build this kind of supporty fighter, you can use all the help you can get. But I am always open to critique, so I would definitely appreciate any advice in the comments below. So finally, we come to the Cloistered Cleric. This was, one of the biggest alternative class features in an older edition. It was basically this cleric who, he doesn't use, martial weapons or armor or stuff. He's supposed to be more like a traditional priest in, World of Warcraft. Really just a nerdy reading dude. Kind of more like a wizard than a normal cleric. So I've seen would be, I think what they were kind of going for with, the knowledge domain or the arcana domain. And this is kind of my take on it. This is what I think a cloistered cleric needs in order to be, good at what he does. So obviously for proficiencies, you do not get proficiency with any armor or shields. Additionally, if a domain would give you proficiency with any weapons or armor, you do not gain those proficiencies. So you do still have simple weapon proficiencies. I could have potentially knocked that down even farther so you only had wizard weapons available to you. But that just seemed pretty extra wordy, and I think it's okay to leave them a few extra weapons. Proficiencies, you do get an extra skill though. So again, one more skill, level 1. You get unarmored defense, like a monk. You can't use weapon or a shield, but it's equal to 10 plus your dexterity plus your wisdom modifier. Lastly, divine recovery. This is just like arcane recovery for wizards. When you short rest, you get a couple of spell slots back. You can use it once a day. Now, I know somebody is thinking that unarmored defense is too strong. And originally, I was gonna just give them a mage armor buff, so it's always 13 plus your dexterity modifier. Which that probably would be pretty fair too. And with the good argument, I could definitely see changing this in the future. But the way I see it is, if you're a cloistered cleric, you're obviously going to be maxing wisdom first. So that's going to put your AC at about 15. 15 is not a good AC. That's a fine AC, but it is not a good AC. Then if you want to start buffing dexterity after that, you got to decide, do you want dexterity with your, your light crossbow is going to do more damage, or would you rather buff constitution? I think most are going to go for constitution over dexterity. So I don't see your dexterity getting over 14 probably tops. It'd probably be your third highest score, because why not? So that would give you an AC of 17. That's really not great, but it's not bad. And again, the other big thing is, if I just gave them, 13 plus dex, that would put them pretty much on the same level as a wizard or a sorcerer, having mage armor. But I don't think a cleric has as good of a spell list as a wizard or sorcerer, especially because a lot of their best spells require them to be very close to the enemies, like Spirit Guardians. So I think allowing them to have maybe a little bit better AC still is fine. But that's all of them. You'll notice I didn't come up with any for barbarians or rangers, because 1, there are plenty of ranger changes in Tasha's. I didn't want to touch that one. And 2, I really couldn't think of a good way to make a small change to barbarian that would have a meaningful impact. I thought about trying to change their rage in some way, but it seemed too iconic and I didn't want to touch it. So if you guys have any good ideas, I'd be happy to hear them. But that's all I have today. If you guys have any advice, I'd be happy to hear it in the comments below. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.